All right, this is Sports Talk with PlayerAgent3. I have a special guest today. He's the co-creator, executive director of a documentary out right now on the Tubi app called Ball Side Middle. Brooklyn, New York native, Mr. Craig Booth. How you doing, sir?
Doing great, Miguel. Thanks for having me.
Very honored to have you on the show, man. But before we get into this this documentary, I want you to kind of talk about the early days of growing up in Brooklyn and that whole basketball culture, just as a kid growing up.
Absolutely. So the great thing about it, we were able to kind of get some of that covered in the documentary, but I'll just give you sort of the high level without giving too much away. Brooklyn, New York, during those years, we're talking about the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, going into the 80s, was a time where Brooklyn was really an interesting place. Where we lived in the projects, most of the Black community lived in the projects. We have tons of projects, thousands and thousands of people living in the projects. We had about 4 or 5 neighborhoods in Brooklyn that were deemed ghettos back then. They don't call them ghettos anymore, but back then they were deemed ghettos. And ghettos because they were below the poverty line. And we had a lot of crime and different things of that nature, a lot of gangs. We have 40, 50 gangs in Brooklyn alone. Now gang warfare back then wasn't a result of people getting murdered. It was, you get jumped, you get beat up, maybe stabbed here and there, but it wasn't really, as catastrophic as you hear about these gangs today. But then on the other side, we had the white neighborhoods, whether it be predominantly Jewish or Italian, and they were very segregated, very racist neighborhoods. And so, we were forced to go to schools in those neighborhoods because they didn't invest in a lot of schools in our neighborhoods. And so that was something called desegregation busing, which I go over a little bit in the film. The busing era is on the heels of the civil rights era. And Brown versus Board of Education, where they said, hey, let's desegregate the schools. And the schools were not cooperating. Yeah, the law said you can't have only white school or only Black school, but the laws did not make people do things. So what the city decided to do, and it happened in Boston and LA and other places, was to let's bring the Black kids and the white kids together by busing them, taking them out of their communities into other communities. Well, when the white communities got wind of what was going on, they did something called white flight. So they left, or they went to private schools. They were not coming into our hood to go to school. So it was a one-way busing. And so we had to deal with busing, being called the N-word every day, fighting at 11 and 12 against 18, 19, 20-year-old people, and then come home and deal with those elements, the gangs, the drugs, all that. So our savior was the basketball court. And what they did in Brooklyn, as well as throughout all of New York City, was build a whole lot of outdoor basketball courts. Every project had 2 or 3 parks, and the parks would have 6 to 8 full courts. And so basically that was our heaven. We went there and we hooped. And then in the winter, we had after school programs right after school, and we had night center. So basketball just reigned because it was economically feasible. All you needed was a ball. You could play by yourself. You could play 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 3-on-3, 4-on-4, 5-on-5. And then ultimately, there were some great men that started organizing us and putting us on teams and start creating tournaments and leagues and things that became pretty prominent. And the next thing you know, at 10 years old, I was competing at a high level, playing in a tournament called the Citywide Athletic Association, where they had a tournament in Bronx, Brooklyn, Staten Island, Manhattan, and Queens, and then the winners play each other for an opportunity to be coined a city champ at your age bracket. So very competitive, let me just say this, compared to today, and I go to Brooklyn a lot, man, we stayed in the park. I'm talking about sunrise to midnight. The park was just everything. Everything was about the concrete, the hoop. And even when we was back in the project, we'll play on a crate or a garbage can. We just played. And my brother and I, we would play puff basketball, or we would play with a bunch of socks and a hanger. So basketball was just our life. It was a way of doing things. It was an everyday thing. I don't think I missed a day playing basketball as a child.
Yeah, and that was definitely a question I was going to ask you in terms of, playing today in New York versus when you grew up. But you legendary rapper Notorious B.I.G., rest in peace, Brooklyn, New York native. He said either you're selling crack rock or you got a wicked jump shot. Was that the story in Brooklyn?
Yeah, pretty much. But I would really change jump shot. I think jump shot rhymed with what he was trying to say. Yeah. But you had a wicked handle.
Yeah.
I mean, most of us could handle that ball. It was about dribbling and really, kind of put it on a yo-yo. We called it a paddle, a handle. Yeah. And that was really our forte. And we put out a lot of guards that can really play with that ball. Mm-hmm. We weren't great jump shooters because of our rims. Our rims was all metal, so we didn't shoot the ball that well. I'm not going to give them that. I think the best jump shooter we had in my era was Chris Mullin. And after that, we were taking it to the rack. Everybody was driving by people and going to the rim.
All right, ball side middle. Where did that name come from? Now I have I heard where the name originated from, but tell everyone how that name came to be.
Sure. So there was somebody we called the godfather of basketball in Brooklyn, and his name was Lester Roberts. Mm-hmm. Peace. Lester was the greatest organizer in Brooklyn. He created organizations. He created the first multi-team organization in probably all of New York City, which was called Brooklyn, USA. And Lester had, he was a coach as well. He coached us. He coached, everybody in the community. And he had a drill, which was similar to a 3-man weave called ball side middle. Mm-hmm. So the 3-man weave is typically tight, right? You pass and go behind your pass, but the ball side middle was had a meaning. You get the ball, control the ball, you push it to the side, which was foul line extended, and then you go behind your pass. The foul line extended hits the opposite guy in the middle. He goes behind the pass, and now we driving down the court with 3-on-2, 3-on-3, whatever the case. But we have balance. We have guys on both sides of the court. Now, there's 2 metaphors with that. So the first metaphor, and Coach Ray Haskins, who's a disciple of Lester Roberts, would say, once you get the ball, you have control of your life. And then once you kick it to the side, it moves everything that's in the middle to the side, therefore creating an opportunity for you to sneak through the middle and bring it down and run the break. And my metaphor for the movie, because Lester Roberts is at the center of my storytelling, is the ball saved my life. Mm-hmm. The ball is always with the side are the people that support you, which is your parents, your community, your coaches. And in the middle is your DNA, your core, where the ball always sits and resonates. It is the gift that you've been given. And you take that gift and you drive it to whatever you want to do in life. So it has sort of 2 metaphors, but it's also simply a Lester Roberts drill.
Ball side middle, currently streaming on Tubi right now. So if you guys go and check it out, staying on that theme, what inspired you to create this documentary?
Sure. So when I turned 50 years old, I wrote a book, and it was called My Stories, My Life, My Point of View. And I got a lot of criticism from my people that read my book, and they said, you didn't go hard on Brooklyn basketball. You touched the surface on your basketball life. So what I decided to do was to write another book. But then we hit COVID. And in 2020, my future son-in-law and my daughter, filmmakers. And so I was telling them about this book I'm gonna write, since now it's COVID, I got some time on my hand. And they said, man, you need to film this, because we didn't have film. And a lot of things that went on in Brooklyn got skipped over for that era. And so when I told them the compelling reason for telling the story, which is not only to highlight these great men, but to talk about how Brooklyn back then was coined the Mecca of basketball in the entire world.
Mm-hmm.
Put 32 guys in the NBA during that 10-year period. 32 NBA players that played high school ball in Brooklyn suited up, which you've never heard of, never been done since. So when you look at that number of players representing one borough, not a city, but a borough of Brooklyn, then you start saying, man, there's a story here. But then there's the Lester Roberts story. And then there's these other coaches and their stories. So I put it all together, and I decided to do this during COVID. We interviewed 140 people. We got 170 hours of film. We started curating articles from back in the day. We started putting it together, and I really didn't know how I was going to break that story down. And then by the time I got to the end of 2020, I was able to start really formulating the story and started really doing sort of the way it's appearing in the film. And so by the time we got to mid-21, we got a deal with Tubi to put it out on Tubi. But I do want to say this, and I'm comfortable saying this, Amazon has requested our film, Amazon Prime. So we're waiting for that process to happen. So we may, get in on Amazon and be in front of 90 million potential subscribers,
That's awesome.
That's a beautiful thing.
That's awesome. Yeah. Now for the people, for the people that aren't from New York, a lot of people, when they think about New York City basketball, you hear Rucker Park, you hear West 4th Street, you hear the Kingdome in Harlem. You never hear about any of these parks or tournaments in Brooklyn. Do you feel like Brooklyn is the forgotten borough when it comes to basketball?
Well, Brooklyn, that's a good question. Brooklyn fell off. All right. So when you see what I talk about in my era, the number, I would say let me just give some history. The Rucker Pro, Holcomb Rucker, used to work in Brooklyn, and he ran Kingston Park in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. His first tournament was in Brooklyn, and he had pro players playing in Brooklyn. Then he got transferred to Harlem, and he started running the Rucker up on 155th Street. So that Rucker started in Brooklyn, but needless to say, the Entertainers League, which became very, very popular in the early 2000s, and after the Rucker Pro went away, the Entertainers League picked up, and as we've seen Fat Joe and P. Diddy and them. Yeah. Well, one of the gentlemen that ran it was a gentleman by the name of Ricky Wheeler, who passed away. Ricky Wheeler's from Brooklyn. He played high school ball with me. He was on my high school team. So there's some Brooklyn influence there. The number one tournament back in my day, and it had 3 chapters. One chapter happened in the late 60s, the second happened in the early 80s, and the third happened in the late 90s, and that's Soul in the Hole. Yeah. So Soul in the Hole, which has a movie out. They had a movie on some of the people that was prominent, but that's the third version of Soul in the Hole. Our version of Soul in the Hole was like the number 2 tournament in all of New York City behind the Rucker. And then eventually in 1985, it went away. And then the Soul in the Hole kind of dissipated, and then West 4th kind of jumped because all the Brooklyn guys started playing in West 4th. And when you look at West 4th, I would say 60% of those teams are from Brooklyn, and it's always been. Brooklyn just goes up to West 4th all day. Now, let me just say this. Totally agree with you. We've kind of lost our organizers, the people that run tournaments, good tournaments. We used to have a tournament called the Brevoort Coliseum, which Albert King, Bernard King, all of them played in it. And it was the number 1 tournament in Brooklyn at one point in the early 70s. They used to play games at night in the center of the projects, which was unheard of. Now you got Dykeman and all that going on, but you didn't have that. So when you look at Brooklyn, it had some significant prominence in those days. And the Rucker eventually became more popular, but Brooklyn was standing strong back in the 70s and 80s. But now, with the new era, people tend to travel to Riverside, Gauchos, because they got money in those programs. They tend to go uptown because there's more hype, more, people putting their cameras on what's going on there. So yes, Brooklyn has fallen off from being the Mecca. And most of the great players 16 players from Brooklyn since the year 2000 played in the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
Of the 16, only 8 played high school ball in Brooklyn. And when you talk about high school ball in Brooklyn, and I'm assuming your era, your age, is all about Lincoln High School and the Marburys and Sebastian Telfairs. Well, you know, Marbury had some brothers that were pretty nice back in my era. You know, Eric Marbury just passed away. You know, Don Marbury, Noah Marbury. You had some guys that was in his family that paved the way for him. But again, we got cited only because of the media and not having film and the media presence.
Well, Brooklyn definitely has a rich heritage in basketball legends. You talk about Chris Mullins, Stephon Marbury, his brothers, Lenny Wilkins, Sweet Pea. A lot of people don't know that Lloyd Daniels is from Brooklyn. My guy, Darryl Robinson. Is there a particular foundation that all of these Brooklyn legends can relate to? Does that start with Lester Robertson?
Lester Robertson, yes, it starts with it because there are what I would say disciples from Lester's tree. So Lester Robertson is the founder of Sports Unlimited, ultimately becomes Brooklyn USA. Out of his program, NBA player Jerry Reynolds, that played at Alexander Hamilton, LSU, played in the league for 9 years. Kerry Skerry played in the league for 5 years. Those guys came a direct descendant. But he also groomed a lot of coaches. He groomed a coach called Gil Reynolds, who was a softball coach. He brings Gil Reynolds into the fold. Gil Reynolds coaches World B. Free, NBA player. Jocko Jackson, NBA player. Jeff Houston, NBA player. He coached Darryl Robinson. He coached Vinnie Johnson, Sam Worthing, both NBA players. Sid Green, NBA player. Lorenzo Charles, NBA player. Pearl Washington, NBA player. John Sally, NBA player. All these guys, including myself, I ain't make it to the NBA, but all of us play for a man called Gil Reynolds. And Gil Reynolds is by far one of the greatest coaches that ever lived on this planet. He is responsible for 80% of the NBA guys that we talk about in our documentary. Of those 32, 80% he's touched them. He's put hands on them. And so it starts with Lester, but him bringing Gil into the fold, and then some of his other disciples. Now you have that. But then we had this great high school situation. We had in 1974, 75, and 76, the top 2 high school teams in the country. And Brooklyn faced each other. Canarsie faced Lafayette High School. And since that happened, the PSAL has designed it where they will no longer have 2 Brooklyn teams meet each other in the championship, because we were just so dominant. Any year, any 2 teams could have been in that championship. Now, fortunately, Darryl and our alma mater, South Shore, has won a lot of Brooklyn PSAL championships on the boys and girls side in the last 4 years. I think they won 3 out of the last 4, or maybe 4 out of the last 4. So we're proud to say Brooklyn is making a comeback as far as high school ball is concerned. But as far as our summer leagues and things of that nature, or putting guys in the NBA, that's been a very slow grow. Ever since the Marburys, we had Whitehead at one point. Of course, we had the other Lincoln product, the 6'7" kid. I forget his name. The one that always bothers LeBron. His name is slipping me, but he's another Brooklyn product. Lance Stevenson, another Brooklyn product. So we're getting a sprinkle here and there. But back in the day, I tell you, Mario, people would come, and Miguel, they would be scared of us. Like literally, yo, Brooklyn's in the house, and you literally knew you was in for a war. It was just that intimidating. And we had a brash about us, because if you can survive in just playing pickup ball in Brooklyn, you're going to be able to really outdo a lot of other people because of the competitiveness. Like we were just straight fire, and that's how it was.
And I know the Harlem guys, the Harlem cats will probably get at me when I say this, but I think Sham God is originally from Brooklyn.
Hey, I give you one better. Michael Jordan was born in Brooklyn.
That don't count.
No. His first breath was Brooklyn Air. Come on,
Okay.
man. Come on, Miguel. His first breath was Brooklyn Air. And quite honestly, I think the parent, I think his dad had an issue with the job or something. That's why they left.
Yeah.
Do you know how much better he would have been if he stayed in Brooklyn? How much better he would have been?
I don't know about that. But listen, something I want you to touch on something because, of course, I watched the documentary, and I want you to touch on the fact that, you know, there was a coach in Brooklyn. I can't remember his name, but a coach, I think he set up a situation where he wanted players or coaches to learn how to be referees. And I think that started something, a pipeline of, you know, guys, you know, being referees on the college level as well as the pro level. Talk about that for a few minutes.
Yeah, so that's Lester Roberts. That's another one of those great things that Lester Roberts did. Lester Roberts believed that in order for you to be a great coach, you need to learn how to referee. And it's ironic because I didn't know that was the prescription, but Ray Haskins, who is one of the all-time greatest coaches out of Brooklyn, he taught me how to referee. So I went on to have a 27-year referee career and a 30-year coaching career. So I was like Lester and Ray, we coach and we referee. And we referee organized ball, college ball, high school ball, but we also coach. But what Lester did was so important for all Black referees in America. Mm-hmm. In the 70s, in the mid 70s, maybe like 76, 77, Lester and a bunch of other officials created an organization called Saboa. And it was an all Black officiating organization that eventually went from Brooklyn and it matriculated into the Bronx and Manhattan and still exists today. Lester and his crew decided to petition the NBA and petition the NCAA for the lack of Black representation in both NC2A and the NBA. So in Lester doing so, they got a lawyer and they were going to kind of, settle. In the settlement, everybody's supposed to sign off on the settlement, and guys started backing out because they were afraid of their reputation. Well, Lester signed the dotted line just to kind of be the representative of the group. And the NBA creates a job called player development, right? Officiating development, vice president. And it went to a gentleman named Cecil Watkins, who did phenomenal things in Queens and also New York City. So Lester didn't get the job. He was a little salty about it. This is basically the information I got. He was very salty about it. And I think Lester started really trying to understand, why didn't I get the job? And because Lester was a high school dropout. And none of us knew that. Lester was an educated man that didn't finish high school. So because he didn't have the academic credentials, he did not get the opportunity. But then also possibly because he signed the dotted line and took the NBA to that level whereby the NBA had to do something about it, he may have been blacklisted as well. We don't know the truth. Lester's moved on from this life, but we do know it could have happened either way. Given that Lester went back and decided to go to college, he got his GED, and he also got his 2-year degree, associate's degree, and he went on to be a coach in college, and then ultimately wound up at LSU. And he worked at LSU for a little bit, and then he wound up becoming the top recreation guy in Baton Rouge. There's a story about Lester in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, that we haven't even told, because what he did in Brooklyn is small compared to what he did down there. They have a building named after him in Baton Rouge. So Lester was powerful, man. He was a special, unique individual that we all, kind of benefited from his work.
Mm-hmm. Now, Craig, you created something special with this documentary, recognizing some important people who's paved the way for guys in Brooklyn and probably New York City as a whole. Do you think this is something that is missing in Black communities across America, not just Brooklyn or New York City, but just, recognizing, the greats that people probably wouldn't have known about?
No, absolutely. And that's a very good point that you're raising. Great question. when I'm a streamer, you know, I'm old school, but I do look at a lot of Netflix, Amazon, etc. And a lot of the representation of us in these documentaries and also on these programs is either, you know, violence with drug dealers. You know, 50 Cent got a lot of good stuff out. I enjoy watching it, but everything is about crime. And then a lot of documentaries are, you know, talking about these big time drug dealers or whatever. Then when I look at some of the sports documentaries, they're not representative of what New York City offered. Of course, they have the New York City point guards, but again, all those guys have a Wikipedia page. We didn't learn anything new watching that, right?
Right.
So for me, it was important that for my own personal selfish bias is that I had to tell their stories because, you know, their stories are so important to our history, but also the fact is, how often do we get to see so many positive Black men being represented in one film? And so that was important to be able to do that. And then secondly, you know, I just think that we have to control our narrative. And if we sit back and wait for someone else to tell the story, or somebody comes from outside of our community that did not live in Brooklyn during the time, did not know these people personally, like I've known them since I was 12 years old, then you're gonna tell a story differently. You're gonna put a twist on it. You're gonna make it Hollywood and entertaining. And we're saying, no, we just want to tell the story and control the narrative, which is the truth of what we all experience. So I say in the beginning of my film, it is a story, but it is not the story, because Brooklyn has many stories. And I don't think you could ever say there's the story. But what happened in Brooklyn has happened in Chicago, has happened in LA, has happened in Houston, has happened in Atlanta, has happened in Chicago, has happened in the Bronx, Manhattan. We need more people. You don't have to be a filmmaker. You just go get you a filmmaker and tell those stories, and that history will be preserved and cemented. That was the goal, and I think we got the goal accomplished.
All right, I gotta put you on the spot.
Okay.
You ready?
Yep.
Top 5 players from Brooklyn. Your opinion.
I'll give you a top 5. All right. Number 1, Bernard King.
Okay.
An assassin, coached by Gil Reynolds. Number 2, Chris Mullin. Highly accomplished, bad white guy. Played against them, tough. Wasn't afraid of anything, and played all over Brooklyn. Number 3, for me, is Pearl Washington. Pearl straight dominated high school basketball. He averaged damn near 40 points a game in high school. And you see what he did to Georgetown when he was up at Syracuse.
Yeah.
So that's 3, right? What I got, 3 there?
That's 3. You got 2 more.
All right. Number 4 for me is a guy that didn't make it to the NBA, but played in the ABA, and that's Fly Williams. Fly Williams, another assassin, played at Austin P, averaged 30 points a game in college, played in the ABA, and then the ABA folded, and then, you know, just had a topsy-turvy life. But without a doubt, he's on everybody's top 5, without question. There's no argument about him. And then the last one, you know, it's really, you know, I could be selfish and go with my idol, which is Sam Worthing, but I'm gonna go with another guy who's a straight assassin, and that's World Be Free. Yeah. And I'll say World Be Free. You know, he killed the NBA. He was a career 20-point average guy, and one of the most humble guys that gives back to Brooklyn, comes back to Brooklyn on a regular basis, hangs out with us. He never left Brooklyn. He played for Philly, played for Cleveland, played for Golden State, but he's never left Brooklyn. Out of all the Brooklynites that made it to the NBA, I would say him and Jerry Reynolds are the 2 that give back and make themselves available to the community. All
right. Who's the GOAT of South Shore High School?
Oh man, Daryl might not like me for this one, but man, it's a lot, man. Me, Daryl, Larry McCartan, Stanley King, Andre Stanley. Man, I'm gonna say the GOAT that didn't play. Name is Billy Giddens. He didn't play. Wasn't eligible, but he was the best player at the school. He might tell you that. He might agree with it. I'd have been his teammate.
All right, Craig, we got about 5 more minutes, man. When you talk about some of your favorite park tournaments to play when you were growing up.
Sure. Citywide, definitely, when I was a kid. I played Citywide from 10 years old to about 14. That was just a great tournament. Hype, big crowds, grown men cheering for you when you played. So it was no joke. Soul in the Hole as a Pro-Am player. I played in Soul in the Hole, won Soul in the Hole 1986 with my team. Outside of Brooklyn, well, Brevoort, I never played in it as a kid. I played in it later on. It wasn't the same people running it, but Brevoort was a great tournament. Another great tournament I played in was Nickelodeon Reese Beach, which is really Queens, but Brooklyn owns that beach, so we call it Brooklyn's Beach, Reese Beach. And then Kingston Park, Tillery Park, Nero, all around the same, just a lot of good comp. And then, of course, going uptown, I won the Rucker in 1988 and won West 4th Street in 1987 and won the NBA Pro-Am in 1988 as well. So taking a Brooklyn team with my cousin Sid Jones, rest in peace, and winning. And we had good players on our team. We had Chris Mullen, we had Ed Pickney, who came from the Bronx to play with us, Carlton Owens, John Johnson, some great players, that played at big schools. And we did some work. So, man, we played 5-6 tournaments a week. You your shirts were lined up. So when you go to the tournament, you have the right shirt. But that was ball. We could play in 3 tournaments in one day. On Saturday, 3 on Sunday, then playing like 3 or 4. Then in the winter, you play in the Bankers League, Lawyers League. You just keep playing. There's never a stop. It was just ongoing, and it was beautiful. We barely played pickup.
Yeah,
pickup. You had so many tournaments. You playing. We ain't got time for pickup. We play pickup in the fall, like right when the season's over, maybe September, October. You play pickup on Sunday mornings in the park. Other than that, nobody had time for that.
Is there a part 2 coming for the documentary? Any plans for a film?
Yeah, so the goal is to do either a docu-series, which will be a fictional film based on the characters in the documentary, where we will tell their stories with actors and maybe change the names, but their stories will be told. That's one goal. Or the other goal would be to do a feature film on Lester Roberts and bring everybody in under him. So those are the 2 things that we're looking to do. We're hoping that through platforms like this, somebody sees it and says, hey, I want to talk to you a bit further. They watch the film, they see the characters, they see the lives of these men. And they say, man, because there's more. Like I said, I got 140 hours of film. We only put an hour and 48 out. So there's a lot more to tell, but we just had to make sure that we touched on it. And if I can, just, give a shameless plug to my director, editor, and just a great talent, James Rapelier, better known as A. Waiter. He did all the magic with the film. All I did was tell the story, and he did his best. Of course, my daughter, Melanie Booth, who was a producer, Eric Scott, who was curator and a producer, as well as Ted Gus is a producer. So those are like the core team members, and we had a couple other guys, Eric Shaw, Brian Gusto. They did a lot of stuff for us as well. And lastly, if you go to our website, we have a lot of shorts. We have like 2-minute, 3-minute films on different characters from the era. So it's ballsidemiddledoc.com. So if you go to ballsidemiddledoc.com, you'll see under videos, you'll see a lot of pictures. You'll see different events we have. We created a foundation, and we just had a Hall of Fame ceremony last Saturday. We inducted those men that's in the film into the Hall of Fame. And that's going to be an annual event. So we're just keeping it going by any means necessary.
Well, Craig, I definitely appreciate you coming on the show, man. There's a lot more stuff that I want to get into with you. We can definitely sit down in person the next time and talk about the documentary. Again, tell everyone where they can catch Ball Side Middle.
Sure. Ball Side Middle is now streaming on Tubi TV, TUBI, on most of your smart TVs, but you can also download it on your computer or even on your phone, Tubi TV. Go under the search and put in Ball, BALL, and you'll see it. It'll be the first thing that pops up. So you'll be able to see that relatively quick. And yeah, I would love to talk to you about some of the other things that I have going on. I have a sport and event management company, and I'm also pursuing my doctorate in sport management. So I'll talk sports all day.
For sure. Again, man, I appreciate you coming on the show, and we'll definitely sit down again sometime soon in the future. Everybody, sure. This is Craig Booth, Ball Side Middle. Please check it out. It's streaming right now on Tubi. This is Sports Talk with PlayerAgent3. This is Sports Talk with PlayerAgent3.